All right, now we are going to talk about the de-radicalization of incels. So we are going to start by defining de-radicalization and comparing it against disengagement. So de-radicalization, long-term process, and it is trying to change the attitudes of the individual and address the root causes. So that's important. It's not just undoing the process of radicalization, it is also looking at the root causes of what made somebody radicalized in the first place and preventing that from happening again. And then disengagement. This is just the separation from a radical group ideology, putting space between the individual and the group and the ideology. Um, Absolutely no violent behavior is the intention, and a reintegration into society. And de-radicalization wants reintegration too, but it's kind of more the effort of disengagement, the nature of taking effort away from the radical group and ideology and putting effort into being a functional part of society. Now, counter-radicalization down in the bottom, those are measures taken on a targeted audience to derail the undergoing radicalization process. So that is just when someone is on the path of radicalization, they are being radicalized, but before they get to that endpoint of radicalization, pushing them off that track. And then anti-radicalization, this is non-targeted, more generalized measures to prevent an individual's radicalization in the first place, just showing them as bad. And then we have some ethical issues of de-radicalization. One of these, when is it appropriate to manipulate the way someone thinks and feels through psychology? And that's a big part of what de-radicalization is that kind of manipulation and it's kind of this treatment. And when people feel like they're being treated on as if they have some sort of illness, it really impacts the trust and thus impacts the effectiveness of the intervention. And once one has de-radicalized, should we keep them in the group to gather intelligence? That is a big problem posed by Clutterbuck. So this is looking at we're de-radicalizing someone, but we are not disengaging them. How does that affect the effectiveness of that person's intervention? And how effective really is it? How much intelligence exactly do we get? Is it worth it? Is it worth the risk? Will it all be for nothing? Hard to say. De-radicalization of incels, de-radicalization, definition on the left. Incels, how does this look? Change attitudes towards women, repluralization, so opposite of depluralization, stopping them to blame all their problems on women, all their mental health issues, all their struggles in life, stop blaming it on women. Yeah, and then incel disengagement, what does this look like? Disengagement definition on the right. This looks like a disaffiliation from these online groups and no participation in any movements, no violent behavior for sure, and a reintegration into society. De-radicalization, pros and cons. Some pros, it eliminates prejudice and attitudes, and that is definitely a good thing. And because of this, it makes it resistant to relapse because they do not have this prejudice towards women, so they're less likely to um, re-enter the radicalization stages, and it's very hard with prejudice and attitudes to reintegrate into society, which we'll talk about in a second. Some cons, it is a long process, it can be expensive, also it's very difficult to measure in success because it is all about the attitudes, what these people are thinking, and that it's very hard to know what people are thinking. Disengagement, some pros, it's more easily measured because it's not about what people are thinking, it's about what people are doing and where people are, and it is faster and cheaper. Which brings us to a dilemma. Is it better to disengage 10 people or de-radicalize 2? Is de-radicalizing that much better? Is it okay just to disengage people if we can disengage more of it? But then we are at the risk of it all being for nothing. Hard to say. Some cons of disengagement, susceptible to relapse because they still hold these prejudice, these attitudes, and so they might just get on that path of radicalization again. And it does not address the root causes. Difficulties in reintegration. If you still hold the attitudes, it's going to make it very hard to get through life. For incels, if you hate 50% of the population, all your coworkers, all these people around you, all these women, it is going to make it very difficult to reintegrate into society. De-radicalization, who does that target? Well, it targets those who have adopted some sort of radical ideology. Pretty simple. How is it measured? Well, this is where it gets not so simple. That is very difficult to measure. One could say you can measure through repluralization. How do you measure that exactly? I mean, you could ask them questions. Who do you blame your depression on? And if they don't say women, that's a promising sign, but it's not, you cannot say for sure. Lack of prejudice and biases, again, very difficult. But if they are having positive experiences with women, that's probably the best thing to look at and to measure. And reintegration into society, if they are making an effort, if they're taking the effort away from hating on women and making that effort to reintegrate, that is a positive sign for them having de-radicalized. Disengagement, who does it target? Those who are in a radical group and those who are exhibiting radical behavior. How is it measured? Lack of association with the group, lack of violent and radical behavior, and again, an effort to reintegrate into society and stop affiliating with the group. History of incel de-radicalization, disengagement. Well, there have been very few macro level efforts um, because it's not illegal in the United States. And also, there's a lot of anonymity, so you do not know how to target, and you can't really target them since it's not illegal. Um, Relatively new movement, so we don't really know what works, what doesn't work. And from Canada's point of view, considering the movement terrorism was a big effort to disengage people. Sure, it was also anti-radicalization, but it was a big thing in disengagement because a lot of people do not want to be associated with a terrorist organization. Most of the exits are voluntary exits because they cannot really get forcefully pushed out. A lot of it because it's not illegal. Um, is banning r/incels anti-radicalization? Yes, because it prevents people from having access to this ideology, and it's also disengagement because a lot of these people who are just kind of casually on the subreddit um, are no longer have access to it, so they're disengaged. Disengaged. Pattern of exit. Some people join, some people leave. It is a very natural process. Some people just kind of grow into it. Some people grow out of it. There are a couple accelerators, not as much as in other radical groups, but a big one is a reluctance to be associated with a violent or explicitly illegal group. So when the group does violent or explicitly illegal things, like acts of violence, murder, things like that. A big example was the 2018 Toronto van attack. A lot of people left after that because they did not want to be associated with that violence and illegality. Speaking out, a lot of former incels do speak out against the group, and I think this is evidence that they kind of mature their attitudes and they kind of just grow out of it, which is something we'll talk about later. Socio-psychological factors of disengagement, a push factor, legal repercussions, and this is big in Canada because terrorists, they're considered terrorists. They do not want to be terrorists. They do not want the legal repercussions of being terrorists. And this is why we see a lot of exit after killings or stuff like that. They fear legal repercussions, so they get out of the group. Um, when there's no change in life or disappointment, a lot of these people are depressed, lonely, cannot get a girlfriend when they join the group, and most of those things do not change when they're in the group, so that makes them want to leave because they are in it for nothing. And toxicity. Cell groups are notoriously toxic. They are always telling each other to kill themselves, and people do not like to be told that, and so they leave after they are told that so many times. Hopefully. Now, pull factors, educational attainment and job attainment. A lot of these are 16 to 22-year-old men, and they are kind of entering that phase of their life where they can pursue higher education or pursue a job, and they want to do that. That becomes the priority over, you know, sitting in incel forums. And they get too old for this, which we'll talk about here. People join incel groups at an emotionally unstable time in their life, 16 or 22, and they outsource all these problems of depression and loneliness that a lot of men have towards women. But it becomes not feasible just sitting around all day, especially, when jobs, education start calling, family obligations, and they eventually they mature into respecting women. They become a part of society, and kind of with that, they gain a respect for women. They see them as equals eventually. Um, De-radicalization factors, positive social experiences. If one has a positive social experience, romantic experience, friendly experience in the workplace, maybe with another woman, that can help de-radicalize them, not just disengage them, but de-radicalize them, truly change their attitude about women when they're having those positive experiences, even just a little bit at a time, or realization of harm to others when they realize, I don't truly believe this when people are killing I don't truly think that women need to die over this, or other innocent people need to die over this. Some obstacles, of course, there are obstacles of leaving. Connections with people, especially women, are even more difficult than they were before. I mean, if you are joining the group because you can't get a girlfriend, it is going to be very difficult to do so if the girl knows that you were in an incel group, because there's a huge stigma around this. This will be seen in romantic, domestic, work-life friendships. It will be very difficult to make connections with people. Um, and that's mostly because of the stigma. And then to reintegrate is to overcome incel status, because incels are self-proclaimed losers and loners, and to get out of the incel shell is to reintegrate. Well, they're trying to reintegrate, but they are trying to not be a loser or a loner. But that's kind of what made them incels in the first place in their head. So to reintegrate is to overcome what they feel like they are. That's very difficult. And then they'll be frowned upon by group members of the incel group. And those are most likely their only friends at that point in their life. And it's very difficult to leave that little bit of socialization they have behind. Um, how do women fit into this? Well, we don't really have to worry about this because very few women are in the incel group. But if they were, we'd probably see one of two stereotypes. You'd see the victim who are dragged into this against their will by something or someone else, or the monster who's evil and hateful, kind of that lost cause that they are hating on their own gender and they just are a hateful person. So some programs. So there's r/incel exit. This provides community to those who are trying to exit, surrounds them with others who are understanding the struggle of exit. So these are kind of it gives people a community, so it gives them socialization, so they're not completely lost, and it takes away some of that trouble of reintegration and of de-radicalization and disengagement. And also, it maintains anonymity, which is very good to remove the stigma. The label of terrorism in Canada, this kind of a indirect effect because people do not want to be associated with terrorist organization. So this is kind of a program you could say put into place. Forced exposure. This from O'Malley, the more they see the world as it actually is, the harder it is to keep insisting that the world is divided into incels, Chads, Stacy's, and Beckett's. And this is absolutely true. The um, the more they exist in society, the more they realize this fantasy that was built by an incel group is not the reality, and it is not plausible to think that way about all these people, to divide them in that way. Um, and that's something to consider is that a lot of this comes naturally once they are in society and they see that the world is not what they have been fed to believe it is, they will kind of de-radicalize a bit by bit. Social issues to address, male entitlement, because that is a big root cause of what caused this. You know, a lot of males think they are entitled to sex and relationships. Take this away, and the incel hardly exists at all. Bullying, a lot of these men were bullied, and I mean, it is a big problem in schools. We know that, but they are made to feel bad about themselves. They're made to feel like these losers and loners, and that is what draws them to this group, a bunch of losers and loners who supposedly understand each other. And make mental health and depression resources more accessible. Absolutely. I mean, these that is the number one cause. We looked in the last slideshow. The correlation is incels to depression, incels to loneliness, incels to anxiety. That is where it all hits. It's not about the hate towards women. It's about this depression and mental health. Jack Peterson, here is our subject. You can find him in a lot of YouTube videos or articles. He joined when he was 17 years old and he felt rejected by women and from society as a whole. He was in the group for 2 years. He exited after the 2018 Toronto attack because he felt the movement had progressed too far from the dark humor he expected. So, kind of that thing, he does not want to be associated with this explicitly violent, evil group. De radicalization or disengagement. What was this? This was disengagement because his attitude changed on the group, not towards women. Now, maybe he's de radicalized by being a part of society since then, but this in itself was just a matter of disengagement. He did not want to be a part of this group anymore. Challenges of measurement. For de-radicalization, it's hard to know one's attitudes. We talked about that. Hard to know what's going on inside someone's head. And also the definition of de-radicalization in itself is ambiguous. And if you don't really know what you're measuring, then how are you going to measure it? Metric to use, positive experiences and feelings towards others, especially women. I think the experiences is a very good one to see because if you're having positive experiences with women, then de-radicalization is most likely kicking in. Disengagement. It's hard to know if they were truly disengaged for incels. Or like removed because it is so anonymous and it's just sneak onto the online forum. It's very hard to know. Metrics to use: group membership, lack of posts or views of other posts or media content on incel forums if you can get that information. Some unhappy consequences of de-radicalization and disengagement efforts. It further builds a stigma when you're targeting certain people. There is an over reliance on law enforcement a lot of the time with a lot of disengagement and de-radicalization programs. Brown talks about this, and this undoes the trust and feeling that the program is trying to help rather than prosecute when you're targeting people, not only targeting them, but with the police and with law enforcement. And then community backlash. We saw this with Boko Haram, with the amnesty controversy. Amnesty isn't such a big thing because it's not illegal. But it's like, can these people be forgiven? Should they be forgiven? How should we reintegrate them? So some suggestions: get them excited about reintegration, find their passions and give them good reason to de-radicalize. A lot of these incels just don't have good reason to de-radicalize because they not like their life. They don't have anything to be excited about. They are just miserable one way or the other. So they may as well be miserable with other people. So give them something to be excited about and focus on that, on the reintegration. For incels, work on reintegration, and many of the attitudes and behaviors will change themselves because if they are just in a workplace, say with women, they will change their attitudes hopefully over time with women. So if we just focus on reintegration, a lot of the other stuff will work itself out. Keep in mind mental health issues, again, leading cause of inceldom. So keep that in mind. Therapy, stuff like that, address those as the root causes. And then Sloan study: do not rush the program or form a radical, or else we are risking it all being for nothing. And then finally, what do we not know? We do not know what the women de-radicalizing from the incel group looks like because that's completely understudied. It's understudied women de-radicalizing from anything, especially incel groups. We know basically nothing about that. And women's place in helping others de-radicalize. How can we um, bring women into this program to help the men respect them? How deep is the ideology for most incels? We have no idea because, we have some personal accounts who say they don't truly believe in, say, Elliot Rodgers' cause, but uh, do most incels? Do any incels? It's very hard to say because it's all about this ironic humor. The best ways to find incels to target, there's so much anonymity that it is very difficult to find people to target, and we can't just pull them out of the prison system for most of them because they're not really doing illegal activity. The ethical considerations of targeting an incel who's done nothing illegal, kind of same thing. What backlash can this cause? We can't just pull them out of the prison. So where do we target them? Where does that cross the ethical line? And how effective have these programs been? Not that there have been a lot of programs, but the efforts we have made, how effective are them? We don't really know, partially because they're new, but we don't have the data on them to know what to pursue further.